Hey, welcome in APUSH Nation to another Fireside chat this Sunday afternoon. Please pardon the hoarseness of my voice. I think between the homecoming game on Friday and then yesterday celebrating a momentous victory in the Pegasus World Cup, one of my favorite horses. I think I've lost my voice just a little bit, but that's not going to stop us here on this Fireside chat, Gilded Age edition. We set the tone for the Gilded Age in class on Friday, explaining how the idea behind the Gilded Age is very similar to the era of good feelings, where the United States was going through a wave of contradictory principles. The word gilded meaning something looks very ornate and beautiful and gold on the outside, but on the inside it's not the same material, the same metal, and that we're going to look at that today with politics. Politics in the Gilded Age is a fascinating case study of sweeping changes within the American government system, unbelievable amount of political participation. The Gilded Age was one of the most politically contested eras in American history. And then also sort of a phenomena of congressional supremacy over the executive branch. If you were to have to name one Gilded Age president right now, could you? I mean, that's always a great stumper to ask people. How many Gilded Age presidents can you name? Well, really, you should at least get one off, or two off the bat, since we've already talked about them. That's Ulysses S. Grant and Rutherford B. Hayes. And a lot of what you already know about Grant and Hayes' presidencies, you can apply that into this era of the Gilded Age. But again, overarching themes: incredible political participation, political corruption, we already know that with Grant, and then the Compromise of 1877, which is how Hayes became elected. But again, this theme of congressional supremacy, that Congress would have more power and more influence on the United States government than any other element of the government in this era, is a true theme that steers politics in the Gilded Age. And where we're going to first begin is just talking about the system at play. And one of the most egregious sort of trends that the Gilded Age produced was this sort of patronage, cronyism that Grant practiced. This would continue to plague the Republican Party throughout most of the 1870s. And remember, the Republican Party has had a strong run here of presidents, going from Lincoln twice to Grant twice to Hayes. And that's going to continue when James Garfield is elected in 1880. So the Republican Party maintained a lengthy dominance of the presidency, yet it's within Congress where the Democrats had risen to reclaim victories, the redeemers. So the Republican Party was plagued immensely by patronage. And this kind of comes to the surface in American society in an unfortunate way here, because in 1881, James Garfield was assassinated by a man named Charles Guiteau. And Charles Guiteau is believed to have been motivated to kill Garfield because Garfield had overlooked him for a job in the federal government. Garfield's death creates the second time that a president in American history is assassinated. And to take over for Garfield was none other than Chester A. Arthur, who was a Union College graduate, by the way. Go you! But Arthur will, unfortunately for his case, his presidency is not very well known, and Chester A. Arthur drew the ire of the Republican Party by trying to put an end to the cronyism and patronage system. And what Arthur did was that he ultimately urged Congress to pass the Pendleton Civil Service Act. And the Pendleton Civil Service Act was a new push that any federal government job, anybody appointed to a job in the federal government had to pass a rigorous civil service test. And Arthur's idea was to weed out some of the patronage and cronyism plaguing the government and creating a case where the public was generally losing its faith in a lot of elected leaders because of their corruption and their schemes. And so Arthur tried to clean up the government, but in the process of doing so, it drew him he became the consternation of the Republican Party leadership. And so Arthur was not offered a chance to run again for the presidency in 1884. And 1884 would be the first time that the Democrat Party won the presidency since James Buchanan. So almost 20 years before a Democratic leader is back in the White House. And that would be Grover Cleveland. Now, Grover Cleveland goes down in history as being the only American president to be elected twice non-consecutively. And in between Grover Cleveland, there's Benjamin Harrison. So the Gilded Age presidents go Grant twice, Hayes, Garfield to Arthur, accidental president, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, back to Grover Cleveland. That's kind of the lineage of those presidents. And like I said, the majority of people probably couldn't even name one of them if they had to. And again, we're not going to go into very much detail about anyone's specifics. Okay, that's really not the point of this talk. It's to lay the foundation for that theme of corruption, that theme of looking the other way on a lot of key issues. And there's a reason that the Gilded Age presidents are not historically well known. And that's, again, because Congress was such a dominant player in shaping American policies. Now, the tie-in here to what we're going to talk about on Monday is that a lot of the policies of the federal government no doubt urged the growth of big business. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the rise of monopolies and how very little the government did to put an end to these rises in big business and captains of industry. But that was for a reason. There was a benefit to the government seeing big business come to dominate the economy. America's economy was roaring, finally, back on its feet after the Civil War. And most of that rise was in part due to laissez-faire politics when it came to the economy. You know, the era of good feelings, the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age can ultimately help you understand when the true nature of laissez-faire economics, the hands-off approach to the economy, was truly shaping the American economy in a way that the United States becomes a world power, economically speaking, for one of the first times in its history. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the government did not stand in the way. There was very little regulation of the economy during this era. Thus, railroads and steel and oil companies just start collecting massively dominant businesses. And we'll be talking again more about these on Monday, tomorrow. So the federal government did very little to mitigate the rise of big businesses. But on a smaller level, politically, the United States was also undergoing major shifts, especially at the lower, localized levels of government in inner cities. And what is another cornerstone of the Gilded Age is the rise of what were known as political machines. And these political machines were dominant local party politicians who were usually mayors or governors. And these local politicians truly ushered in an era of corruption, bribing, gerrymandering, vote rigging. It's truly a dark period in American political history, much like the Gilded Age on the presidential level. You had corruption in Grant's administration, and there's no better example of a political machine being dominant than the one that the Democratic machine that controlled New York City for decades, and that's Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall, and I have some good cartoons on this we'll start class with tomorrow. Tammany Hall was one of the best known political machines in the entire United States. And there were political machines in Boston and Chicago and Cincinnati as well. But Tammany Hall dominated New York City politics for decades. And their iconic figure, who ultimately wound up going to jail for some of the scandals that he was involved in, was a guy named Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed. And Boss Tweed was the architect of this Tammany Hall dominant stretch, and he served as the mayor of New York City for a number of years. And his politics really came to define the corruption, the bribing, getting immigrants coming off the boats and lining them up to go vote in elections, or having dead people's votes count. It's truly the stuff of legends what these political machines did to rig things in their favor. So unlike at the federal level where Congress was so powerful during the Gilded Age, at the local level, these mayors and machines can just control the majority of American politics. And again, much like the presidential level, a good example I gave you with Chester A. Arthur, trying to clean up the politics at the federal level, there would be a cleansing process as well amongst the local politicians. But in fact, it was not some broad sweeping legislation. It was going to be the newspapers. Newspapers and media primarily helped keep in check a lot of the corruptions and scandals, and they reported on these occurrences widely. And the journalists that went after these stories, you probably have heard this term before, they were known as muckrakers. And that was really where the muckraking journalism gets its birth in the United States. The political corruptions and scandals of the Gilded Age births an entire new style of journalism where scandal sells and corruption sells papers. So journalists began tracking down and covering and trying to highlight the rise of big business and corruption, and they looked for any juice they could pick up with regards to the local or even federal politics. So muckraking is a term I would say you would definitely want to have to take away for today. And that's pretty much it, as far as what I wanted to get across to you guys. Like I said, I have some good cartoons I'll show you on the Gilded Age tomorrow. If you have any questions, we can quickly follow up. But we are going to get into talking more specifically about some of the key robber barons and captains of industry who were transforming the big business era, like I kind of tied in today with the laissez-faire attitudes of the government. So we'll put that all together tomorrow in class. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Sunday. Enjoy your evenings. Take care. And remember, the past shapes the future.